traveller. Beneath the quiet stars of the Sahara, a vast shape waits in the sand, half lit by dawn, its shadow stretching longer than memory itself. You didn't arrive here by chance. Something older than history has drawn your attention to this moment, to a monument that seems to remember more than it reveals. What if the story we've been told about the Great Sphinx is only the final layer resting atop something far older and almost forgotten, carved from a single mass of limestone weighing hundreds of thousands of tons? It stands where stone tools should not have been enough, where time itself feels uneven. Like a message etched into the earth, aligned with ancient skies, repeating a pattern humanity no longer remembers. Listen closely. Let's drift a little deeper. Before dawn reaches the Giza Plateau, the desert enters a brief interval of suspension. The air-cooled shadows stretch long across the limestone, and the Great Sphinx appears less like a monument than a presence, something that has endured not merely through time, but through repeated attempts to define it. In that quiet interval, the familiar story of its origin begins to feel less certain, as though the stone itself resists the explanations placed upon it. The Sphinx has been repaired many times over the course of Egypt's long dynastic history. These interventions are visible to anyone willing to look closely. Blocks of limestone have been added to stabilise eroding surfaces, yet they sit awkwardly against the original carving. The joints are uneven, the stonework imprecise, the fit hesitant. These repairs do not reflect ignorance or lack of effort. They reflect a gap in understanding. Whoever attempted to preserve the monument was responding to something they did not know how to recreate. This contrast raises an uncomfortable question. If the Sphinx was carved during the 4th dynasty, traditionally attributed to the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, around 2550 BCE, then the later restorers were heirs to the same architectural culture. Egypt was not a civilization that forgot how to work stone in a few centuries. Its techniques became more refined, not less. Yet the original carving displays a level of precision and cohesion that later hands could only approximate. The implication is subtle but profound. The earliest phase of the monument reflects knowledge that subsequent generations no longer fully possessed. Modern surveys of the Sphinx intensify this unease. The primary cuts of the body are clean and continuous, lacking the chaotic impact marks expected from extensive use of percussion tools. Some surfaces appear smoothed in a manner inconsistent with copper chisels and stone hammers alone. This does not require invoking lost civilizations armed with fantastical technologies. It simply acknowledges that the orthodox explanation does not fully account for what is physically present. The standard response has been to emphasize proximity. The Sphinx sits adjacent to Khafre's pyramid and valley temple. Therefore Khafre must have commissioned it. Yet proximity is not proof of authorship. History is full of structures absorbed into later complexes, inherited rather than created. A monument's location tells us where it stands, not necessarily when or why it was first made. Alternative explanations, once considered speculative, now appear less implausible when placed beside the evidence. The idea that ancient builders employed techniques no longer understood, perhaps methods involving vibration chemical softening of limestone or controlled fracturing, is not extraordinary. Human history contains many examples of technologies lost and rediscovered. Roman concrete, Damascus steel, Greek fire. Stoneworking may belong to that same category of forgotten mastery. More consequential is the question of age. The Sphinx's body displays erosion patterns that do not resemble wind abrasion, the dominant force in Egypt's arid climate. Instead, it exhibits deep vertical channels and rounded surfaces consistent with sustained exposure to rainfall. Such weathering requires a climate radically different from today's Sahara. Geological records indicate that the Giza region experienced prolonged periods of heavy rainfall during the African humid period between roughly 9000 and 5000 BCE, with earlier wet phases extending back toward the end of the last ice age. If the Sphinx was carved during one of these humid intervals, its origins predate dynastic Egypt by several millennia. This would explain why later Egyptians repaired rather than replicated it, why they integrated it into their ceremonial landscape without explicitly claiming its construction, and why its form feels both central and anomalous within Egyptian tradition. The head of the Sphinx adds another layer of complexity. Its proportions do not match the body. Measured against the scale of the torso, the head appears undersized as though carved down from something larger. Stone cannot be added once removed. Any recarving necessarily reduces volume. This suggests that the current face may not be original. Comparisons with statues traditionally identified as Khafre yield inconclusive results at best. Erosion alone makes precise facial identification over thousands of years unreliable, yet this uncertainty is often presented as confidence. A compelling alternative is that the Sphinx originally bore a leonine head, proportionate to its massive body later reshaped into human form. This would align with early Egyptian religious symbolism, in which lion and lioness figures embodied solar and protective forces, long before pharaonic portraiture dominated monumental art. Recarving the head would have transformed an older, more elemental symbol into one compatible with dynastic authority. Weathering patterns reinforce this possibility. The head shows less erosion than the body, consistent with being reworked at a later date. The difference is not subtle. It suggests different exposure histories, different moments of creation. Silence, however, may be the most telling evidence of all. Egyptian civilization was meticulous in documenting royal achievements. Temple statues, pyramids, and ritual acts were recorded with care. Khafre's reign is well attested in inscriptions and architecture, yet nowhere in the surviving record does he claim to have commissioned the Sphinx. The monument most closely associated with his name remains conspicuously unmentioned. This absence cannot be easily dismissed. If Khafre had carved the Sphinx, one would expect some acknowledgement, an inscription, a dedication, a fragment of text linking his name to the work. Instead, the Sphinx enters the historical record as something already ancient, already present. The dream stela of Thutmose IV, erected over 1,000 years after Khafre's reign, reinforces this impression. It describes the Sphinx as buried in sand and venerable a being that grants legitimacy rather than receives it. Thutmose does not describe building the monument or inheriting it from known ancestors. He restores something old and powerful without origin. Taken together, these strands, geology, astronomy, proportion, silence, form a pattern that resists the neat progression taught in textbooks. The Sphinx appears less like the product of a single dynasty, and more like a survivor, a remnant from a forgotten epoch, absorbed into later history without being fully understood. Perhaps this is why it continues to unsettle. It stands at the boundary between what is remembered and what has been lost. It suggests that human history may not be a straight line of progress, but a cycle of emergence, collapse, and partial inheritance. The Sphinx does not confirm this view outright. It merely allows it quietly by refusing to fit comfortably into the story we prefer to tell. And in that refusal it endures. Silence surrounds the Great Sphinx in more ways than one. Beyond the physical quiet of the desert lies a deeper absence, an archival void, where explanation should be. Egyptian civilization recorded itself obsessively. Kings etched their names into stone, listed their ancestors, documented temple foundations, quarry expeditions, ritual reforms, even repairs. Yet for the most imposing sculpture on the plateau, the record falls silent. That silence is not empty. It is structured, persistent, and difficult to reconcile with orthodox chronology. If the Sphinx had been commissioned by a 4th dynasty pharaoh, it would represent one of the most ambitious sculptural undertakings of the Old Kingdom. Such a project would have required planning, labour, organisation, and ideological justification. These were precisely the kinds of achievements Egyptian rulers celebrated, and yet no inscription from Khafre's reign, no papyrus fragment, no relief, no dedicatory text mentions the carving of the Sphinx. The absence is striking because it is selective. Khafre's pyramid, complex valley, temple causeway, and statuary are all securely attributed. Only the Sphinx remains unclaimed. This silence invites an alternative reading. The monument may already have existed when Khafre came to power. In that scenario, claiming authorship would have been risky. Oral knowledge could have contradicted it. Priests and local traditions may have known the Sphinx predated the dynasty. Rather than invent a provenance, the safer political strategy would have been incorporation without attribution, building nearby aligning rituals around it, and allowing proximity to imply ownership without ever stating it outright. Architectural details support this possibility. Khafre's causeway does not align cleanly with the Sphinx enclosure. Instead, it bends slightly as if adjusted mid-design to accommodate an immovable object already present. The Valley Temple appears fitted into the existing topography rather than dictating it. Such compromises are unusual for a civilization capable of imposing geometric order on landscapes. They make more sense if planners were working around a monument they did not create. Later dynasties encountered the same dilemma. The Sphinx was too ancient and too authoritative to ignore, yet too mysterious to explain. Restoration became the solution. But restoration is never neutral. Each intervention reinterprets the past. The most revealing example of this process is the so-called beard of the Sphinx fragments, of which reside today in the British Museum. The beard is presented as evidence of royal identity, a sign that the Sphinx was always a pharaonic monument. Yet the physical evidence complicates this claim. The surviving fragment does not align cleanly with the chin of the statue. Attachment points are inconsistent angles, mismatched scale, uncertain. More tellingly, the carving style corresponds not to the Old Kingdom, but to the New Kingdom over a millennium later. Decorative motifs, tooling marks, and proportions reflect a different artistic sensibility and different techniques. If the beard was added during the New Kingdom, its purpose was not restoration, but transformation. Ceremonial beards were symbols of divine kingship, linking rulers to Osiris, and concepts of resurrection and cosmic order. By adding such a beard to the Sphinx, later pharaohs could reframe the monument as an ancestral royal figure aligning its ancient authority with their own legitimacy. This was not preservation. It was appropriation. Evidence on the statue itself supports this interpretation. The chin area shows signs of drilling and modification consistent with later attachment rather than catastrophic breakage. A massive stone beard falling away from an original carving would leave deep fractures and stress scars. These are absent. Instead, the surface suggests something added and later removed, not something integral lost to time. The pattern repeats with the face. The head's reduced scale, divergent weathering, and ambiguous resemblance to Khafra point toward a carving. Each reshaping would have erased earlier features, replacing them with forms more acceptable to contemporary ideology. Over centuries, the Sphinx became a palimpsest stone rewritten again and again, until its original identity blurred beyond recognition. This process of overwriting is not unique to Egypt. It is how power negotiates with inheritance. When rulers encounter monuments older than their authority, they rarely destroy them outright. Destruction admits weakness. Instead, they reinterpret. They add, modify, rename. They allow the monument to survive, but only after bending its meaning. The Dream Stealer of Thutmose IV exemplifies this strategy. The inscription presents the Sphinx as a divine agent selecting the young prince for kingship. Thutmose does not claim to have built the monument. He claims to have been chosen by it. This subtle shift avoids the question of origin entirely. The Sphinx becomes a source of legitimacy without requiring explanation. Even more revealing are traces of erased inscriptions beneath the steler's text. Imaging studies show that earlier markings were deliberately removed before Thutmose's narrative was carved. Whatever those erased lines contained earlier restorations, different gods, alternative traditions, they were incompatible with the new story. Stone was edited to preserve authority. Meanwhile, the monument itself continued to record a different history. Erosion carved vertical channels into its body. Rainfall shaped its enclosure walls. These geological signatures do not respond to ideology. They accumulate regardless of who holds power. When geologists examined these patterns, they recognized a climate far wetter than any Egypt known to dynastic history. The implication was unavoidable. The Sphinx had stood through environmental conditions that ended thousands of years before the Old Kingdom. Astronomy adds a parallel testimony. The Sphinx faces due east directly toward the point of sunrise at the equinoxes. Due to the precession of Earth's axis, the constellation rising with the sun at the spring equinox changes over millennia. During the Old Kingdom, this constellation was Aries. During the African humid period around 500 BCE, it was Leo. A lion facing the rising sun while Leo ascended the horizon would not be a coincidence. It would be a deliberate alignment. Such alignments are not isolated. The layout of the Giza pyramids mirrors the stars of Orion's belt, but not as they appeared in Khafra's time. The configuration matches the sky of the same distant epoch suggested by geological evidence. Earth and sky converge on the same window of deep time. At this point, coincidence becomes an inadequate explanation. The Sphinx appears to belong to a forgotten chapter of human history, one marked by different climates, different symbols, and a level of knowledge not preserved in writing. That chapter ended, perhaps abruptly, leaving behind only what could not be carried away, bedrock carved into form. Later civilizations inherited the remains. They repaired, renamed, and reinterpreted them. Over time, the inherited monuments became national origins, their deeper past submerged beneath layers of meaning. The Sphinx survived not because it was understood, but because it was too powerful to discard. What remains today is not merely a statue, but a question held in stone. It asks how much of human history has been erased by climate catastrophe and convenience. It suggests that civilization may not begin once, but many times, each beginning, built upon fragments of what came before. The Great Sphinx of Giza does not answer that question. It simply endures, weathered and silent, bearing the weight of time like a memory no one fully remembers, yet no one can entirely forget. Beneath the surface of the Giza plateau, the story grows quieter and more unsettling. While the visible body of the Sphinx carries the marks of time in its stone, the ground below it carries something else entirely absent, shaped with intent. For decades, independent surveys using different methods have detected anomalies beneath and around the monument spaces where solid bedrock should be voids that reflect signals in ways consistent with hollow chambers rather than natural fractures. These findings have been replicated often enough to form a pattern, yet not often enough to become accepted knowledge. Seismic refraction studies conducted in the late 20th century revealed rectangular cavities beneath the forepaws and behind the body. Later, electromagnetic and ground-penetrating radar surveys, including those carried out by Japanese research teams, confirmed similar structures. The geometry matters. Natural voids tend to be irregular, collapsing into unpredictable forms. These spaces show right angles, consistent depths, and spatial relationships suggestive of deliberate excavation. The data does not specify what lies inside, only that something does. Ordinarily, archaeology responds to such findings with careful curiosity. Non-invasive exploration techniques exist precisely for situations like this. Narrow boreholes, fiber optic cameras, and microendoscopic tools allow researchers to see inside sealed spaces without destabilizing surrounding structures. These methods have been used successfully in tombs, pyramids, and caves across the world. At Giza, however, permission has repeatedly been denied. The official explanation has shifted over time, but always arrives at the same destination. At first, the anomalies were dismissed as noise, natural fissures misread by over-enthusiastic instruments. When additional surveys confirmed their presence, the explanation changed. The voids were acknowledged, but declared geologically insignificant. When that proved insufficient, concerns about structural integrity were raised, despite the minimal invasiveness of proposed investigations. The result has been decades of deferral. This pattern raises questions that extend beyond the chambers themselves. Archaeology as a discipline exists to confront uncertainty through evidence. When potential evidence is identified and then systematically avoided, the avoidance becomes part of the story. It suggests that the unknown is being managed rather than explored. One reason often cited is preservation. The Sphinx is fragile, its limestone body vulnerable to groundwater pollution and vibration. This concern is legitimate. Yet preservation alone cannot explain the blanket refusal to even observe what lies beneath. Observation does not equal excavation. Seeing is not the same as disturbing. The reluctance to look suggests that the risk being managed is not physical damage but interpretive consequence. Institutional inertia plays a role. Egyptology is built upon a carefully constructed chronology that underpins museum exhibits, academic careers, national narratives, and a global tourism industry. If the chambers contain nothing, the status quo is preserved. If they contain something that contradicts accepted timelines, inscriptions, tools, symbolic objects, or evidence of an unknown cultural phase, the implications ripple outward. Textbooks would need revision. Long-held assumptions would require re-evaluation. Authority would shift. There is also the matter of precedent. Once one sealed space is opened and yields unexpected results, pressure mounts to examine others. Giza is not an isolated site. Similar anomalies have been detected beneath other monuments across Egypt and beyond. Opening the door in one place invites questions everywhere. Into this environment entered an additional complication legend. In the early 20th century, claims emerged that ancient knowledge was hidden beneath the Sphinx, a so-called Hall of Records. These ideas popularized by mystics and speculative writers lacked empirical grounding, yet they had an unintended effect. By associating underground chambers with mysticism, authorities gained an easy means of dismissal. Serious geological data could be brushed aside by linking it to fantastical expectations. The irony is that the legend did not create the anomalies. Instruments did. Seismic waves reflected differently. Electromagnetic signals behaved inconsistently with solid rock. These are measurable phenomena independent of belief, but once framed within a narrative of fantasy, they became easier to ignore. What remains beneath the monument may be mundane empty chambers, unfinished tunnels, structural voids left by ancient quarrying. Or it may be something more consequential. The refusal to look ensures that speculation fills the vacuum. Silence invites imagination. This dynamic mirrors the larger history of the Sphinx itself. Again and again, ambiguity has been met not with investigation, but with reinterpretation. When origin was uncertain, authority supplied a story. When physical evidence complicated that story, it was minimized. Over time, repetition hardened conjecture into fact. Yet the Earth keeps its own records. Climate history shows that North Africa underwent dramatic transitions at the end of the last ice age. The African humid period transformed desert into savanna, sustaining lakes, rivers and large populations. When the monsoon belt shifted southward, these systems collapsed. Water vanished, landscapes dried, human communities were forced to migrate or adapt rapidly. Such transitions are not gentle. They erase settlements, scatter people, and sever continuity. If a complex society existed in this earlier environment, its archaeological footprint would be vulnerable. Settlements near vanished lakes would now lie buried beneath sand or destroyed by erosion. Organic materials would decay. Only stone anchored to bedrock would endure. Monumental architecture, if present, would survive in fragments, isolated, enigmatic, stripped of context. This scenario aligns uncomfortably well with what is observed. Egyptian civilization appears suddenly in the historical record already equipped with sophisticated architecture, astronomy, and symbolic systems. The expected developmental stages are sparse. The learning curve seems truncated. Rather than building gradually toward mastery, the earliest dynasties display a level of precision that later periods struggle to maintain. One explanation is missing evidence yet to be found. Another is inheritance. Knowledge does not always originate where it is recorded. It can be transmitted, adapted, misunderstood, and eventually mythologized. Egyptian texts speak of Zep-Tepi, the first time an epoch when gods ruled and the foundations of order were established. Academic consensus treats this as mythology, but mythology often preserves distorted memory, not pure invention. The Sphinx fits uneasily into both myth and history. It does not proclaim its maker. It does not explain its purpose. It simply remains facing the horizon, accumulating interpretations without confirming any of them. Its silence is not empty, it is layered. Perhaps that is why investigation feels threatening. Opening chambers beneath the monument would not just reveal physical contents, it would confront the possibility that human history is less linear, less orderly than assumed. That civilizations can rise, fall, and be forgotten so thoroughly that only their most durable questions survive. In this light, the unanswered questions surrounding the Sphinx are not anomalies to be resolved, but signals to be heeded. They suggest that certainty can be premature, that consensus can harden before understanding is complete, and that the past may be deeper than the frameworks used to contain it. The monument does not demand belief. It demands patience. It has endured climatic collapse, cultural transformation, and repeated reinterpretation. it can endure a little longer. What remains unresolved is whether those who study it are willing to endure uncertainty as well, or whether silence will continue to stand in for answers not yet sought. Over time, the unanswered questions surrounding the Sphinx begin to resemble a pattern rather than an oversight. The monument occupies a strange position, in human history too monumental to ignore, too ambiguous to explain cleanly, and too resilient to erase. Civilizations have come and gone around it, each leaving marks not only on the stone, but on the story told about the stone. What survives is not a single narrative, but a layered accumulation of interpretations, each shaped by the needs and assumptions of its era. In ancient Egypt itself, the Sphinx was already old enough to require explanation. The dream stealer of Thutmose IV does not describe a new monument or a recent achievement. It describes a relic, half buried in sand, powerful enough to speak in dreams, ancient enough to grant legitimacy by association rather than by origin. The text frames the Sphinx as something inherited, not created. It does not clarify where it came from. Instead, it redirects attention to what it can do in the present. Choose kings bestow, authority anchor destiny. This shift is revealing. When origin is uncertain, meaning is reassigned. Rather than solving the mystery, the narrative sidesteps it. Restoration replaces explanation. Reverence substitutes for understanding. Over time, the monument becomes detached from its builders and reattached to whoever controls its interpretation. That process did not end in antiquity. Modern archaeology, despite its scientific tools, is still shaped by human structures of authority. Chronologies become institutional commitments. Once established, they influence what questions are asked, what evidence is prioritized, and what anomalies are tolerated. Evidence that fits the framework is integrated smoothly. Evidence that strains it is isolated, contextualized away, or left unexamined. This does not require conspiracy. It emerges naturally from specialization. Egyptology, like any mature field, is built on accumulated assumptions. Challenging foundational premises risks destabilizing decades of work. Few disciplines reward that kind of disruption. As a result, uncertainty is often treated as a problem to be managed rather than explored. The Sphinx resists this management. Its physical characteristics refuse to align neatly with the timeline assigned to it. Its erosion patterns suggest exposure to conditions that no longer exist. Its proportions imply modification rather than original design. Its silence in contemporaneous records raises questions that proximity alone cannot answer. Each inconsistency can be explained individually, but together they form a constellation of doubt. Doubt, however, is not absence of knowledge. It is a signal that knowledge is incomplete. In science, doubt drives inquiry. In history, it often provokes discomfort. The past feels safer when it is settled, when events follow a clean progression, from simple to complex, from primitive to advanced. The idea that complexity could precede collapse, that knowledge could be lost rather than steadily accumulated, complicates that narrative. Yet geology has already forced a reconsideration of linear time. Earth's history is not a smooth ascent, but a series of cycles, warming and cooling, expansion and contraction, creation and erasure. Civilizations exist within these cycles, not outside them. Climate shifts reshape habitability. Sea levels rise and fall. Rivers change course. What thrives in one epoch may vanish in the next. If human societies emerged earlier than currently recognized, shaped by environmental conditions that no longer exist, their disappearance would not be mysterious. It would be expected. What would be remarkable is not that so little remains, but that anything remains at all. Stone anchored to bedrock is among the few materials capable of surviving such transitions. The Sphinx is carved directly from the plateau itself. It is not assembled, not transported, not easily dismantled. It is part of the landscape. That may be why it endured when other structures did not. It may also be why later cultures encountered it as a presence rather than a creation. This perspective reframes the monument's meaning. Instead of representing the apex of a known civilization, it may represent continuity across collapse. Not a symbol of dominance, but of persistence. Not a declaration of power, but a question left deliberately unanswered. Questions unlike answers age well. An answer fixes meaning in time. A question invites reinterpretation. Each era sees the question differently shaped by its own concerns and limitations. The Sphinx has functioned this way for millennia. It has been a god, a guardian, a royal portrait, an astronomical marker, a geological anomaly. None of these roles fully exhaust its significance. What unites them is the human impulse to claim ownership of mystery, to name it, frame it, and fold it into existing narratives. When that impulse fails, silence fills the gap. Silence becomes authority's refuge, yet silence does not erase evidence. The erosion remains, the proportions remain. The voids beneath the ground remain. So does the broader pattern of early human sophistication, appearing suddenly in multiple regions, monumental stonework, astronomical alignment, symbolic complexity emerging with little visible prelude. These patterns do not demand a single explanation. They demand openness. They invite interdisciplinary inquiry rather than disciplinary defense. Geology, climatology, archaeology, and astronomy each hold pieces of the puzzle. None alone can resolve it. The risk is not that history will be rewritten incorrectly, but that it will remain unwritten where it most needs revision. When institutions prioritize stability over exploration, the unknown becomes taboo. The past hardens into doctrine. The Sphinx stands as a counterexample to that hardening. It does not conform, it does not clarify, it does not yield easily. It endures, inviting attention without offering closure. In that endurance lies its quiet significance. It reminds us that civilization is fragile, that memory is selective, and that progress is not guaranteed. It suggests that human history may be punctuated by losses as profound as its achievements. If so, the greatest lesson of the Sphinx is not about who built it, but about how easily builders can be forgotten. Names fade, languages vanish, stories are overwritten. What survives is not certainty but stone-shaped into a question that outlives its authors. The task, then, is not to force an answer prematurely, but to recognize the value of the question itself, to accept that some truths emerge slowly across generations as tools improve and perspectives shift, to allow the past to remain complex rather than comforting. In that sense, the Sphinx does not guard secrets, it guards humility. It stands as a reminder that knowledge has limits, that confidence can outpace evidence, and that the earth remembers more than we do. Seen from this perspective, the Sphinx no longer belongs solely to Egyptology. It becomes part of a much larger human story, one that intersects with climate science, astronomy, and the long memory of the planet itself. Its meaning expands outward away from dynasties and reigns toward epochs, measured not in centuries but in millennia. The monument begins to feel less like an artifact of history, and more like a geological witness shaped by human intention. Climate provides one of the most compelling contexts for this shift. During the late Pleistocene and early Holocene North Africa was not the arid landscape known today. Monsoon systems reached far north, filling basins, sustaining grasslands, and supporting animal populations that now seem incompatible with the Sahara. Lake beds, river channels, and pollen records confirm that this green Sahara persisted for thousands of years. Human populations did not merely pass through these environments, they lived within them. In such a setting, the emergence of complex cultural expression is not implausible. Archaeological evidence from the African humid period already demonstrates symbolic behavior, organized ritual spaces, and early astronomical awareness. Sites like Nabta Playa reveal stone alignments, tracking solstices, and seasonal cycles constructed long before the rise of dynastic Egypt. These were not random placements of rock. They required planning, shared knowledge, and continuity across generations. If communities capable of such coordination existed in the desert's greener phase, then monumental carving anchored to bedrock becomes less extraordinary. It becomes contextual. The Sphinx, rather than an anomaly, may represent the extreme end of a spectrum of human responses to environment, sky, and time. Astronomy deepens this interpretation. The orientation of the Sphinx toward the eastern horizon is precise. While often described as a generic solar alignment, its significance changes when considered alongside precessional cycles. Earth's axial wobble alters the backdrop of stars against which the sun rises at equinoxes. This slow shift is measurable, predictable, and known to ancient observers attentive to the sky. Around 10,500 BCE, the constellation Leo rose with the sun at the spring equinox. A lion-shaped monument facing that horizon during that era would have mirrored the sky in stone. This correspondence is not proof of intent, but it is suggestive. When combined with the Orion correlations proposed for the Giza pyramids alignments that fit the same time frame more closely than the Fourth Dynasty, the pattern becomes difficult to dismiss as coincidence alone. The idea that ancient builders encoded astronomical memory into architecture challenges conventional assumptions about early human cognition. It suggests a deep, temporal awareness, a desire to mark not just seasons but ages. If so, the Sphinx may function as a timestamp anchoring human presence to a specific moment in cosmic rhythm. Such a function would explain its endurance beyond utility. Unlike tombs or temples, it does not house remains or rituals. It observes. It faces the horizon and waits. Its silence is part of its design. This interpretation also reframes the chambers detected beneath the monument. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic surveys, and electromagnetic imaging have consistently revealed voids beneath and around the Sphinx enclosure. Their geometry appears deliberate rather than random, yet access to these spaces has been repeatedly denied, postponed, or minimized. Official explanations cite, preservation concerns a valid consideration given the monument's fragility, but non-invasive methods, fiber optic cameras, microdrilling, smaller than existing restoration holes have also been rejected. The result is a paradox. Anomalies are acknowledged, but investigation is constrained. Whether these chambers contain artifacts, inscriptions, or nothing at all remains unknown. What matters is not what might be found, but what is being avoided. Archaeology's purpose is to examine uncertainty, not to preempt it. When inquiry is halted before evidence can be gathered, interpretation freezes prematurely. This hesitation reveals the tension between heritage and discovery. Monuments like the Sphinx are not only scientific subjects, they are symbols embedded in national identity, tourism economies, and cultural pride. Reinterpreting them risks unsettling narratives that extend far beyond academia. Yet history has been unsettled before. The age of the Earth was once measured in thousands of years. Evolution challenged creation myths. Plate tectonics overturned static views of continents. Each shift was resisted not because evidence was weak, but because implications were profound. Reconsidering the Sphinx belongs to this tradition of intellectual discomfort. It does not diminish ancient Egypt. It situates Egypt within a deeper continuum of human adaptation and loss. It suggests inheritance rather than isolation, continuity rather than origin. This does not strip meaning from Egyptian civilization. It enriches it. To inherit and reinterpret an ancient monument is itself an act of cultural intelligence. It acknowledges reverence for what came before, even if understanding was incomplete. What becomes harder to accept is the idea of absolute beginnings. Human history, like climate history, appears layered rather than linear. Knowledge accumulates fractures and recombines. Techniques are discovered, forgotten, and rediscovered. Civilizations rise atop the foundations of others, sometimes literally. In this view, the Sphinx is neither an Egyptian invention nor an outsider anomaly. It is a threshold object bridging eras, cultures, and epistemologies. It belongs to a time when humanity's relationship with earth and sky was different, less extractive, more observational. Such a relationship may be returning out of necessity. Modern societies face climate instability, resource stress, and systemic fragility. The past, once assumed irrelevant, now offers cautionary parallels. The idea that advanced cultures can disappear is no longer abstract. The Sphinx, weathered and incomplete, stands as evidence of that possibility. It does not warn loudly, it does not explain, it simply remains. Perhaps that is its final significance, not as proof of a lost golden age, but as a reminder that permanence is relative. Stone endures longer than memory, landscapes change faster than stories. What survives may not tell us what we want to hear. In the end, the Sphinx does not resolve history, it complicates it. And in doing so, it invites a quieter, more careful kind of curiosity, one willing to sit with uncertainty, to observe patterns without forcing conclusions, and to accept that some of humanity's deepest chapters remain only partially visible, written not in words, but in erosion, alignment, and silence. As the implications of this broader perspective settle in, the Sphinx begins to feel less like a singular puzzle, and more like a symptom of something larger, a recurring pattern in the way human history is constructed, defended, and revised. What appears at first to be a disagreement about dates or builders slowly reveals itself as a deeper tension between evidence and narrative, between what survives physically and what survives institutionally. Archaeology, by necessity, works with fragments. It reconstructs entire worlds from broken stone, displaced soil, and partial records. This makes interpretation unavoidable, but interpretation becomes fragile when it hardens into certainty. Once a timeline is accepted and repeated, it gains authority through familiarity rather than proof. Over time, the distinction between hypothesis and fact blurs, and alternative readings of the same evidence are treated not as contributions but as threats. The Sphinx sits directly in this contested space. Its physical presence is undeniable, yet its story remains oddly unresolved. When geological evidence suggests greater age, the response is rarely to expand the inquiry but to narrow it. When astronomical correlations point toward deep time, they are labelled coincidence rather than investigated as intentional design. When voids are detected beneath the monument, curiosity is replaced with deferral. This pattern mirrors a broader discomfort with discontinuity. Human cultures prefer stories of steady ascent knowledge, accumulating tools, improving societies, growing more complex over time. Collapse is acknowledged but usually framed as localized or temporary. The idea that an advanced culture could vanish so thoroughly that only indirect traces remain challenges this preference. It suggests that progress is not guaranteed and that loss may be as fundamental to history as growth. Yet Earth's own record tells a different story. Extinction is not an exception, it is the rule. Entire species dominate ecosystems for millions of years and then disappear, leaving only scattered fossils. Climate systems shift abruptly. Oceans rise and retreat. Forests become deserts. Against this backdrop, the disappearance of complex human societies becomes not only plausible, but expected. The African humid period illustrates this clearly. For thousands of years, North Africa supported lakes, rivers, and grasslands. Human populations adapted to this abundance, developing cultural practices attuned to seasonal rhythms and celestial cycles. When the climate shifted and rainfall retreated southward, those systems collapsed, migration followed, knowledge fragmented. Landscapes that once sustained life became hostile. In such transitions, continuity is rare. Survivors prioritize immediate adaptation over preservation of tradition. Writing systems, if they existed, would have been among the first casualties. Stone monuments anchored to bedrock, however, would endure. Stripped of context, they would appear inexplicable to later societies encountering them in radically different environments. This may explain why dynastic Egypt treated certain monuments as sacred without claiming authorship. Inheriting something ancient does not require understanding its origins. It requires integrating it into present meaning. The Sphinx could be reinterpreted as a royal guardian, a solar symbol, a divine intermediary, roles that fit Egyptian cosmology without resolving its deeper past. Such reinterpretation is not deception, it is cultural adaptation. Every civilization reuses what it finds. Stones are quarried from older structures. Myths absorb earlier myths. Sacred sites persist even as the gods associated with them change. Continuity often masks transformation. The danger arises when reinterpretation becomes erasure. When layers of meaning overwrite one another without acknowledgement, history flattens. The Sphinx becomes a static emblem rather than a dynamic artifact. Its anomalies are treated as inconveniences rather than clues. Modern science in principle resists this flattening. It values anomaly because anomaly drives revision. But science operates within institutions, and institutions carry incentives. Funding, access, prestige, and public narrative all influence what questions are pursued. When a monument like the Sphinx becomes a cornerstone of national identity and global tourism, scrutiny becomes politically charged. This does not mean truth is being hidden intentionally. More often, it means that uncertainty is managed cautiously. Risks are minimized. Questions that might require rewriting foundational chapters are deferred. Over time, deferral becomes tradition. The result is a paradoxical situation in which one of the most studied monuments on Earth remains among the least understood in fundamental terms. Measurements are precise, models are detailed. Yet the core question why this monument exists in this form, at this location, at this apparent depth of time remains unresolved. Perhaps this is not a failure of knowledge, but a reflection of the monument's purpose. Not all human creations are meant to communicate clearly. Some are meant to endure ambiguity. A structure aligned to celestial cycles spanning tens of thousands of years would outlast languages, religions, and political systems. Its meaning would necessarily evolve. If the Sphinx was designed with such temporal depth in mind, its silence becomes intentional rather than accidental. It does not instruct. It invites observation. It rewards patience rather than interpretation. This perspective also reframes the recurring resistance to opening its underground chambers. Whether those spaces contain artifacts or not is almost secondary. The act of looking would acknowledge that uncertainty remains. It would signal willingness to let evidence lead rather than narrative constrain. History shows that such moments are rare but transformative. When they occur, entire frameworks shift. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe, for example, forced archaeologists to reconsider assumptions about the relationship between agriculture and monumental construction. Structures once thought impossible for hunter-gatherer societies were revealed as deliberate, complex, and ancient. The Sphinx may represent a similar threshold, one not yet crossed. Its implications are broader, touching not only on chronology, but on the nature of civilization itself. It suggests that human sophistication may emerge under conditions we no longer associate with complexity, and that such sophistication may disappear without leaving conventional traces. If so, then the absence of cities' tools or writing from earlier periods does not disprove their existence. It reflects preservation bias. Materials decay, landscapes shift. What remains is what survives catastrophe, not what best represents daily life. Stone carved into bedrock survives. Alignments etched into horizon lines survive. Erosion patterns survive. These are the records the planet keeps when human archives fail. The Sphinx, weathered and incomplete, stands as one of those records. It is not a message in the usual sense. It does not explain itself. Instead, it persists as an unresolved data point, one that challenges assumptions precisely because it cannot be easily classified. In the end, the most significant contribution of the Sphinx may be methodological rather than historical. It reminds us that certainty should follow evidence, not precede it. That unanswered questions are not weaknesses in knowledge, but invitations to expand it, and that history, like geology, is shaped as much by what is erased as by what is preserved. Seen this way, the Sphinx is not an anomaly to be explained away. It is a boundary marker indicating the edge of what we currently understand, and quietly suggesting that beyond that edge lies a deeper, more complex human story, still waiting to be approached with patience, humility, and the willingness to accept that some of the past remains unfinished. At a certain point, the question of the Sphinx stops being about Egypt altogether and begins to concern humanity's relationship with time. The monument does not simply sit in the past, it confronts the present with the limits of interpretation. It forces a reckoning with how knowledge is constructed, preserved, and lost. What appears to be a single sculpture becomes a lens through which broader patterns of human memory and amnesia come into focus. Throughout history, societies have assumed that what they inherit is what was intended to be inherited. Ruins are interpreted through the values of the culture that encounters them, not the culture that created them. This process is subtle and usually unconscious. Meaning is projected forward, not recovered backward. Over time, the original context dissolves, replaced by a narrative that feels coherent because it aligns with contemporary assumptions. The Sphinx exemplifies this process perfectly. Dynastic Egypt encountered an object that was already ancient and incorporated it into its religious and political framework. Modern scholarship in turn encountered Egypt's interpretation and largely accepted it as origin rather than adaptation. Each layer added coherence but also distance from the original act of creation. This is not unusual. Many ancient monuments function the same way. Stonehenge was reinterpreted repeatedly across millennia. Megalithic sites in Europe were absorbed into later mythologies. In the Americas, structures built by earlier cultures were claimed repurposed or mythologized by successors who no longer understood their original purpose. Continuity of place does not guarantee continuity of meaning. What makes the Sphinx distinct is scale, precision, and survival. It is too large to be ignored, too refined to be dismissed as primitive, and too old to be comfortably assigned. Its continued presence exposes a gap between what is known and what is assumed. That gap widens when considering how civilizations remember themselves. Written records create the illusion of completeness. They privilege what was documented over what was lived. When writing disappears, as it often does during periods of upheaval, entire worlds vanish from the historical record. What remains is not representative of daily life or cultural depth, but of what happened to survive. This bias profoundly shapes our understanding of early human societies. Cultures without writing are often labelled prehistoric, a term that implies absence rather than difference. Yet complexity does not require text. It requires coordination, shared symbols, and long-term memory encoded in practice rather than inscription. Monuments carved into landscape may have served as such memory systems. They do not convey narratives in sentences, but in alignment, scale, and endurance. They communicate through repetition of solar cycles, stellar movements, and geological change. In this sense, architecture becomes a form of cognition extended into the environment. If the Sphinx was created within such a framework, its purpose may not have been symbolic in the modern sense, but mnemonic. It may have anchored cultural knowledge to place, and ensuring that even after social collapse some trace of orientation remained. Not a message to be read, but a reference point to be noticed. This interpretation aligns with the monument's resistance to specificity. It does not depict a named ruler with identifying inscriptions. Its face, whatever its original form, lacks the individualizing detail typical of dynastic portraiture. It feels archetypal rather than personal. Its body merges with the plateau, blurring the boundary between natural formation and human intervention. Such ambiguity is often read as deficiency, but ambiguity can be functional. A monument intended to last through unknown futures cannot depend on a single language or belief system. It must remain interpretable across radically different contexts. It must survive reinterpretation. The Sphinx has done exactly that. It has been a guardian, a god, a king, a puzzle, a tourist icon, and geological anomaly. Each role says more about the society assigning it than about the monument itself. The Sphinx absorbs meaning without surrendering its core strangeness. Modern science encounters this strangeness with mixed responses. On one hand, it provides tools capable of extraordinary precision, isotopic dating, radar imaging, astronomical simulation. On the other hand, it operates within frameworks that resist conclusions extending beyond accepted chronologies. Evidence is filtered through expectation. This tension is not unique to archaeology. It appears whenever data challenges deeply held models. Initial resistance is almost always framed as methodological caution. Over time, caution hardens into dismissal. Only when evidence becomes overwhelming does revision occur. The Sphinx may be approaching such a threshold. Not because a single discovery will rewrite history, but because multiple independent lines of evidence point in the same direction. Climate data erosion analysis, architectural anomalies, astronomical correlations, and documentary silence converge on the same conclusion: the monument does not fit neatly into the period to which it is assigned. Accepting this does not require replacing one dogma with another. It requires accepting uncertainty as a legitimate outcome. It requires acknowledging that some chapters of human history remain fragmentary, not because they were simple, but because they were erased by forces larger than any civilization. This recognition carries ethical implications. It challenges the assumption that modern societies represent the apex of human achievement. It introduces humility into narratives of progress. It suggests that knowledge once lost is not guaranteed to return in the same form. The Sphinx stands as material evidence of that vulnerability. Its damaged body and altered face are not signs of failure, but of survival. They show what endures after collapse: fragments, alignments, questions. In this sense, the monument functions less as a relic of power and more as a warning encoded in stone, not a warning of destruction, but of forgetting, of how easily continuity can be broken, of how confidently later societies can misread what they inherit. The deeper lesson is not about Egypt or even about lost civilizations. It is about method, about resisting the urge to finalize stories prematurely, about allowing the past to remain complex and incomplete, about recognizing that uncertainty is not a flaw in understanding, but a boundary marking where inquiry must slow rather than stop. The Sphinx does not ask to be explained. It asks to be approached with care. Its endurance suggests that meaning unfolds over time, not in moments of certainty, and its silence reminds us that some of the most important knowledge is not spoken, but implied, carved into landscapes, aligned with stars and left for future minds to encounter without instructions. In that encounter, the monument continues to fulfill its role, not as an answer but as a question that refuses to fade. As inquiry deepens, the Sphinx begins to resemble less a monument and more a boundary marker between what humanity remembers and what it has forgotten. Its continued existence forces a confrontation with the fragility of historical certainty. Every civilization inherits not the past itself, but fragments filtered through survival, chance, and power. What we call history is often a negotiation between evidence and convenience, shaped as much by absence as by presence. One of the most unsettling implications of the Sphinx debate is not that it may be older than assumed, but that such age would expose a broader pattern of loss. Civilizations do not simply fall, they dissolve. Climate shifts, resource collapse, migration, and social fragmentation can erase not only structures, but continuity itself. Skills vanish, knowledge contracts, memory thins. What remains are anomalies, objects that no longer fit the stories later cultures tell about themselves. From this perspective, the Sphinx may represent a technological and conceptual peak that was never fully recovered. Its scale suggests long-term planning. Its precision implies sophisticated understanding of stone geometry and environment. Its orientation reflects an awareness of astronomical cycles operating on timescales far longer than a human lifespan. These are not the hallmarks of improvisation, but of inheritance from a stable intellectual tradition. Yet traditions can end abruptly. Geological history shows that the transition from the African humid period to the modern desert was neither gentle nor uniform. Lakes dried, rivers vanished, and ecosystems collapsed. Human populations would have been forced to migrate, adapt, or perish. Under such conditions, continuity becomes impossible. Survival takes precedence over preservation. Knowledge narrows to what can be carried, remembered, and applied immediately. If a culture capable of monumental construction existed before this transition, its disappearance would leave little trace beyond what could not be moved. Stone carved from bedrock survives where settlements of wood, earth, and fibre do not. The Sphinx's endurance then may not indicate dominance but accident. It remained because it was too integrated into the landscape to erase. Later cultures encountering such remnants face a dilemma. Objects without context demand explanation. Silence invites myth. Power seeks association. The most effective strategy is appropriation claiming continuity, where none exists, attaching new meanings to old forms. Over time, these meanings solidify, becoming indistinguishable from origin. Modern scholarship risks repeating this process in subtler ways. By insisting on linear development and dismissing anomalies as errors or coincidences, it protects coherence at the expense of possibility. The discomfort surrounding the Sphinx reflects this tension. Accepting uncertainty threatens not just timelines, but identity, academic, cultural, and national. Yet uncertainty is not a weakness. It is a condition of honest inquiry. Science advances not by defending conclusions, but by testing them against inconvenient evidence. When anomalies persist across disciplines, they signal the need for expanded models, not narrower ones. The Sphinx occupies precisely such a signal position. It stands at the intersection of geology and archaeology, astronomy and mythology, memory and erasure. It resists reduction because it was never meant to belong to a single story. Its creators, whoever they were, may have understood impermanence far better than their successors. Rather than asking who built the Sphinx in isolation, the more productive question may be what conditions allowed it to be built at all. That question shifts focus from individuals to systems, from kings to environments, from dynasties to deep time. It reframes civilization as episodic rather than progressive, vulnerable to reset rather than guaranteed ascent. In this framing, the Sphinx is not an outlier, but a survivor. It is evidence that complexity can arise, disappear, and arise again without leaving a clear record. It reminds us that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, particularly in landscapes reshaped by climate and catastrophe. Ultimately, the monument's greatest significance may lie in what it reveals about human humility. Despite our technologies, archives and simulations, we remain partial readers of the past. Some pages are missing, others are overwritten. The Sphinx does not resolve this condition, it embodies it, and so it remains weathered and incomplete, facing the horizon where sun and sky still perform their ancient exchange. Not as proof of a single theory, but as a quiet insistence that history is deeper, stranger, and less obedient than we prefer. Even as the millennia press onward, the Sphinx endures a relic not merely of human hands, but of human limitation of our attempts to measure and contain time. Its body, carved from living limestone, bears the record of forces far beyond any one civilization's control. Rain and wind have sculpted grooves that no chisel could reproduce, creating a dialogue between stone and sky, between erosion and epoch that speaks to durations our species struggles to comprehend. Each line etched by nature is a whisper of a climate long vanished, of a world that was once fertile green and teeming with life, now lost beneath layers of sand. Observers in any age are confronted with a paradox. The Sphinx is immediately familiar, yet inexplicably alien. Its head too small for the body it adorns suggests either miscalculation or alteration. Its face, often identified with Pharaoh Khafra, resists precise alignment with known statuary. The mismatch between expectation and observation creates a quiet dissonance, a tension that invites reflection on the imperfection of record and the impermanence of authority. The more we study it, the more the Sphinx seems to ask questions that cannot be definitively answered. Evidence of restoration, patchwork repairs, and recarving suggests that even within recorded history the monument has been a palimpsest. Layers of human intent, from ideological to practical, have been inscribed over the original work. The Sphinx, in this sense, is as much a record of what has been forgotten or overwritten as it is a record of creation. Its very survival is testament to the endurance of form, even as meaning shifts across generations. Beneath its pores, hidden spaces detected through ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetic surveys hint at further complexity. Void chambers of geometric regularity, unexplored due to bureaucratic and structural caution, suggest that the surface tells only part of the story. Whether these spaces contain artifacts, archives, or simply empty volume, they demonstrate that human curiosity has limits imposed not by physical impossibility, but by institutional decision-making, political expediency, and caution imposed by reverence or fear. The Sphinx exists at an intersection of science, mythology, and human ambition, its astronomical orientation aligning precisely with the point, where the sun rises on the equinox and corresponding with the constellation Leo, during the supposed period of its earliest carving, indicates an awareness of celestial cycles extending beyond the lifespan of individual dynasties. Such precision implies a transmission of knowledge and observational capability that challenges conventional assumptions about the development of early civilizations. It hints at the possibility of a deeper, more continuous intellectual tradition than is visible in surviving records. The geological evidence further complicates the picture. Erosion patterns suggest prolonged exposure to rainfall, inconsistent with the arid conditions of the later Egyptian period. This raises the possibility that the monument predates dynastic Egypt by thousands of years, perhaps, originating during a period when the Sahara was lush with seasonal rivers and lakes. The Sphinx in this light becomes not a product of a single civilization, but a witness to climatic shifts, cultural resets, and the rise and fall of societies whose names and histories have largely vanished. Such a perspective destabilizes established chronology. It suggests that dynastic claims of ownership and authorship may be less about creation and more about appropriation, reinterpretation, and the assertion of authority over mysteries that were already ancient. Pharaoh's priests and restorers may have acted not as creators but as inheritors adapting symbols whose original purpose they no longer fully understood, yet which carried enough power to validate contemporary rule. This raises fundamental questions about human civilization. If knowledge, skill, and monumentality can emerge, vanish, and reappear over millennia, what does that imply about progress, memory, and legacy? This Sphinx, in its silent endurance, suggests that our current understanding of linear development is incomplete. Civilizations may rise to heights that are temporarily forgotten, leaving only echoes in stone, and Earth only fragments aligned with sky. Even modern interpretations carry the weight of this incompleteness. Scholars argue, measure and model, yet all conclusions remain provisional. The Sphinx defies finality because it is older, more layered and more subtle than any single narrative can encompass. Its very survival reminds us that time operates on scales indifferent to human record-keeping. Geological and astronomical evidence does not conform to institutional comfort. It insists on a broader vision of history. Ultimately, the Sphinx teaches that mystery is not merely a lack of knowledge, but an enduring presence. Its erosion, misalignments, and hidden spaces are not failures of design, they are part of the story. They signify that the universe, history, and human perception operate along axes far wider than our attention allows. Each generation reads a version, each layer adds interpretation, and yet the stone itself remains silent but insistent. In this way, the Sphinx becomes both mirror and window, reflecting human ambition, pride, and limitation, while offering glimpses into realities that extend beyond recorded memory. It embodies the tension between what we can document and what endures beyond documentation, between temporal authority and the permanence of matter. Its mysteries persist because they transcend the ordinary scale of human observation, demanding patience, humility, and a recognition that some knowledge cannot be hurried or finalized. By now, the Sphinx is less a statue than a dialogue between epochs, a conversation written in stone across tens of millennia. Its surface, battered by wind and water, encodes histories that no papyrus or tablet can fully capture. The vertical grooves that mar its limestone body are not merely erosion, they are the sedimented memories of rainfall from a Sahara that once bloomed, a record of climatic patterns that shaped landscapes and human settlement long before dynastic Egypt rose. Each channel, each softened edge whispers of a time when the earth itself was a participant in culture rather than a passive backdrop. Observation reveals further anomalies that strain conventional explanations. The recurved head, disproportionately small relative to the body, suggests deliberate human intervention over the original form, yet the precision of the original carving far exceeds what Bronze Age tools should have allowed. The mismatch between restoration attempts and the initial sculpture evokes a civilization passing down techniques it could not fully preserve, as if the knowledge required to carve the Sphinx had already been partially lost. The limestone carved straight from the plateau resists simple attribution to Pharaoh Khafra, challenging assumptions grounded in proximity and orthodoxy. The ceremonial beard, now housed in the British Museum, exemplifies this complex layering of history. Its style aligns with later periods, not the Fourth Dynasty, indicating deliberate modification rather than original construction. The artifact's misalignment with the Sphinx itself symbolizes the disjunction between material and narrative. Monuments in this sense become repositories not only of stone but of interpretation, each generation inscribing meaning according to its own priorities, often erasing or obscuring what came before. Beneath the surface, the mystery deepens. Ground-penetrating radar and seismic surveys reveal voids and chambers, spaces that suggest deliberate excavation, yet have been largely inaccessible due to bureaucratic caution or institutional inertia. These hidden geometries may contain artifacts, inscriptions, or nothing at all. Their significance lies in the questions they provoke what knowledge was deemed too potent or too inconvenient to uncover. Why might successive authorities have deferred investigation, privileging narrative control over exploration? The Sphinx's subterranean mysteries mirror the uncertainties of its visible form, underscoring the limits of human observation. Astronomical alignment adds another layer of sophistication. The Sphinx faces due east directly toward the sunrise on the equinox, corresponding during its hypothesized earliest carving with the constellation Leo. The nearby pyramids align with Orion's belt as it appeared in the same epoch. These orientations suggest a civilization with precise understanding of celestial cycles, encoding cosmological memory into architecture. Such precision, combined with geological evidence of pre-dynastic erosion, supports a timeline potentially extending thousands of years before the recognized pharaohs of the Fourth Dynasty. This intersection of geology, astronomy, and archaeology complicates the narrative of origin. The Sphinx is not merely a relic of a known dynasty, but a surviving fragment of a deeper, perhaps unrecorded civilization. The evidence invites reconsideration of the linear models of human progress. Knowledge skill and monumental architecture could emerge and vanish, leaving subtle traces interpretable only with cross-disciplinary inquiry and a willingness to challenge entrenched assumptions. Human ambition, too, is encoded in the stone. Dynastic rulers may have recarved the head and added ceremonial features to assert ownership, to appropriate authority over a monument they neither built nor fully understood. This is a story of power as much as it is of craftsmanship. Civilizations encountering the unknown frequently transform it to fit their worldview, reshaping mystery into legitimacy. Such acts are layered atop the original work, creating palimpsests that blend innovation, reverence, and erasure. The Sphinx's endurance confronts us with the fragility of documentation. Pharaohs meticulously recorded achievements elsewhere, yet the monument itself is unclaimed, suggesting either conscious omission or absence of knowledge. Its silence contrasts with the abundant inscriptions of Khafra's other constructions. This absence invites speculation. Perhaps the monument predates dynastic authority, entirely a relic, observed, revered, and ultimately repurposed. Its stone preserves what writing cannot: the passage of epochs, the effects of climate, the interventions of successive cultures. Ultimately, the Sphinx embodies temporal complexity. It is not a static object, but an evolving record, one that challenges assumptions of origin, authorship, and authority. Its layers, weathered stone, recarved features, hidden chambers, and celestial alignments invite reflection on how knowledge survives, transforms, and is lost. In studying it, we confront the provisional nature of all historical understanding, the interplay between material evidence and human narrative, and the ways in which civilizations both preserve and obscure what came before. In the end, the Sphinx stands as a witness both ancient and immediate, a marker of what endures beyond individual lifetimes, dynasties, and cultures. Its mysteries are not puzzles to be solved, but signals to be observed, a reminder that history is recursive, layered, and often incomplete. Every groove, misalignment, and hidden void testifies to processes far larger than human intention, geological, astronomical, and cultural, leaving the observer to navigate between evidence and inference. In the vast silence it commands, the Sphinx reminds us that some truths are encoded not in certainty but in endurance, and that our understanding remains perpetually provisional, suspended between wonder and the limits of comprehension. The Sphinx's story extends beyond its visible form, intertwining with the rhythms of climate erosion and cosmic cycles. Vertical channels on its torso, smoothed and rounded over eons, suggest persistent rainfall, a climate vastly different from the desert that now surrounds it. These grooves are not casual marks, they are a record of millennia, a geological memory of the African humid period, when the Sahara supported lakes, rivers, and abundant life. The stone itself becomes a chronicle, preserving evidence of a world that disappeared, leaving humanity only fragments to interpret. Each contour, each groove is a faint pulse from a time before dynastic rule, a subtle reminder that nature itself is a storyteller. Beyond erosion, the Sphinx aligns with the heavens. Its gaze meets the rising sun at the spring equinox, a silent orientation that in 10th of 500 BC aligned with Leo, the celestial counterpart to its leonine form. Nearby pyramids mirror Orion's belt, not as it appears today, but as it was in an ancient sky. Such precise alignment implies advanced astronomical observation, encoding knowledge into stone long before written records could preserve it. The interplay between earth and sky suggests intent planning and comprehension of temporal scales that challenge conventional assumptions about prehistoric societies. The possibility that the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt reorients our understanding of history. If it existed before Khafra's reign, then successive generations may have interacted with a monument whose origins were already mysterious. Recarving's restoration attempts and ceremonial additions reflect a dialogue across centuries of negotiation with something ancient, meaningful, and largely inscrutable. Dynasties may have imposed authority on the monument not through creation, but through reinterpretation, converting its legacy into political and religious legitimacy. The Sphinx, in this light, is as much a monument to human ambition and adaptation as it is a relic of lost technical mastery. Beneath the surface, anomalies detected by ground, penetrating radar, and seismic surveys hint at hidden spaces that have remained unexplored. Rectangular voids and chambers potentially man-made suggest intentions or uses now obscured by time and bureaucratic caution. Access has been repeatedly denied, leaving these features as enduring mysteries. The refusal to explore may reflect structural caution, but it also underscores the tension between curiosity and control, between evidence and the narratives we prefer. Even without excavation, the presence of these spaces amplifies the sense that the Sphinx is a portal to knowledge deliberately withheld from modern eyes. The layering of human intervention over the original structure creates a palimpsest of intention. Recarvings of the head, misaligned restorations, and stylistic inconsistencies indicate that the monument has been repeatedly adapted, reshaped, and reinterpreted. These interventions are neither accidental nor merely aesthetic. They are ideological, symbolic acts designed to assert continuity, authority, or legitimacy. Each alteration obscures what came before, demonstrating that power can redefine history as easily as it preserves it. The Sphinx in this sense is both witness and instrument, bridging human ambition with the mysteries of deep time. The erosion, the recarving, the hidden chambers, and astronomical alignment converge to challenge conventional chronologies. Evidence that spans geology, archaeology, and astronomy suggests a continuity of sophistication lost to time. The Sphinx embodies a civilization whose capabilities may have been unmatched, then partially erased by climate shifts, social upheaval, or cultural transition. Such a civilization leaves minimal traces beyond its most durable achievements, forcing modern observers to reconstruct narratives from fragments and anomalies, and to confront the provisional nature of knowledge itself. Climate geology and astronomy together create a framework in which the Sphinx can be read as both artifact and archive. It is a witness to environmental transformations capable of recording climatic epochs far beyond human memory. The alignment with celestial events encodes temporal markers, transforming stone into a chronometer of deep history. These features demand that we consider time not as linear but as cyclical, layered and recursive, with civilizations rising, collapsing and transmitting echoes of knowledge across millennia. The Sphinx, immobile, yet attentive, embodies this recursive temporality. This perspective reframes our assumptions about human progress. Civilizations may not have emerged gradually from simple, agrarian villages into monumental complexity as conventional history suggests. Instead, the evidence implies that technical skill, astronomical understanding, and architectural sophistication may have appeared, vanished, and reappeared, leaving discontinuities that confound linear narratives. The Sphinx, in its silent endurance, captures the persistence of knowledge through catastrophe and the fragility of memory when environmental and social pressures intervene. The interplay between the visible and the hidden, the recorded and the lost, situates the Sphinx at the centre of a broader inquiry into human and natural history. It is not merely a monument to a single pharaoh or dynasty, but a repository of pre-dynastic legacy, climatic change, and astronomical precision. Its continued presence suggests both accident and intent, the survival of matter through time and the survival of significance, even when comprehension is partial. This duality invites reflection on the nature of endurance, evidence, and meaning across deep history. The Sphinx also challenges our understanding of knowledge transmission. Skills visible in its construction, may have exceeded those known to the civilizations that later inherited it. This implies the possibility of lost techniques now vanished, and lost civilizations whose names and languages remain unrecorded. Each misalignment, worn groove, and precise incision is testimony to capacities that do not fit neatly within established timelines. The enduring mystery of technique, intention, and origin speaks to a world in which human achievement and environmental forces are intertwined in ways that challenge conventional narratives. Ultimately, the Sphinx functions as a fulcrum between observation and imagination evidence and inference past and present. Its body carved from a single limestone bed preserves both geological and human histories. Its gaze toward the east, its recarved face, its ceremonial remnants, and the voids beneath converge to suggest a complexity that exceeds simple explanation. It exists simultaneously as an object, a narrative, and a question, demanding that we reconsider our assumptions about time, civilization, and human capability. In confronting these enigmas, one recognizes that certainty is elusive. Every measurement, survey, and hypothesis interacts with layers of history that may have been deliberately obscured or naturally erased. The Sphinx's endurance is a reminder that permanence is not synonymous with understanding, and that the traces left by ancient hands and natural forces alike require humility and patience to interpret. Some mysteries endure not because they are unsolvable, but because they are larger than our frameworks of expectation. The continued mystery of the Sphinx emphasizes the provisional nature of knowledge. Geological evidence, astronomical alignment, stylistic anomalies, and uninvestigated voids collectively suggest a monument older and more sophisticated than mainstream accounts acknowledge. This challenges conventional chronologies and cultural narratives, demanding reconsideration of what constitutes evidence and authority. In doing so, the Sphinx becomes a mirror reflecting both the capabilities of lost civilizations and the limitations of those who seek to understand them. Finally, the Sphinx occupies a liminal space between certainty and speculation, archaeology and imagination. Its surface orientation and hidden chambers collectively resist reductive explanation, embodying the tension between what survives and what is forgotten. It demonstrates that the act of observation is inseparable from interpretation, and that the past may offer clues that cannot be neatly resolved. The monument stands as a testament to endurance, a nexus of history, science, and mystery, reminding us that the deepest truths are often encoded in silence, in absence, and in the enduring question of what once was. By the time we trace the Sphinx's worn contours and the subtle misalignments in its recarved head, it becomes clear that the monument is not merely a product of human ambition, but also of human limitation. The imperfections in restoration, the uneven joints, and the mismatched limestone blocks speak of attempts to preserve a knowledge already partially lost of techniques inherited, but no longer fully comprehended. Each generation that touched the Sphinx interacted with a relic older than itself, adding layers of interpretation, authority, and ideology, carving not just stone, but a narrative that reshaped the meaning of the monument across centuries. The beard fragment now housed in London exemplifies this layering. Its stylistic attributes indicate New Kingdom workmanship misaligned with the Sphinx's original form and suggest deliberate appropriation and reinterpretation. The act of adding such a feature transformed the monument's significance, connecting it to pharaonic authority and religious symbolism. In doing so, the Sphinx became more than sculpture. It became a canvas upon which successive societies projected legitimacy, ideology, and control. These interventions echo the tension between what is created, what is inherited, and what is claimed, revealing the fragility of attribution and the fluidity of cultural memory. Beneath the Sphinx, hidden voids discovered through seismic and electromagnetic surveys hint at spaces whose function, origin, and contents remain unknown. Rectangular chambers, likely human-made, remain unexplored due to bureaucratic and structural caution, yet their very presence amplifies the monument's mystery. These subterranean features suggest that the visible sculpture is only a fraction of the Sphinx's story. If they contain archives, artifacts, or ritual spaces, they may illuminate a civilization whose traces were carefully preserved or deliberately obscured by time and authority. The denial of exploration becomes a reflection of our own limitations, revealing how control over knowledge can shape what is accessible to collective memory. Astronomical alignments further complicate conventional chronology. The Sphinx faces the equinoctial sunrise, corresponding in 10,500 BC, with the constellation Leo, while the pyramids mirror Orion's belt as it appeared in the same epoch. Such precision implies deliberate observation of celestial cycles, embedding a temporal signature into stone that persists across millennia. This alignment suggests that the original builders possessed knowledge of astronomical phenomena far beyond what is conventionally attributed to early dynastic Egypt. It implies continuity, intellectual sophistication, and a cultural memory that endured through ecological upheaval and societal change. The geological record reinforces this perspective. Erosion patterns consistent with prolonged rainfall contradict the current arid environment, indicating that the monument predates the 4th dynasty by thousands of years. The grooves carved by water during the African humid period preserve a record of climate, revealing that the Sahara was once green, with lakes and rivers capable of sustaining complex societies. The Sphinx thus becomes both geological archive and cultural artifact, a testament to the intertwined forces of environment, time, and human enterprise. Its stone is witness to transformations that no text could fully capture. When observed together, these elements challenge linear narratives of civilization. The Sphinx embodies a complexity that spans climate astronomy and culture. Its survival across millennia reflects both the permanence of stone and the impermanence of human comprehension. Dynasties recarved its head, added ceremonial elements, and claimed authority over it. Yet the underlying structure, geological history, and celestial orientation retain traces of a time beyond human documentation. The monument demonstrates that mastery of material and environment can emerge, vanish, and be partially lost, leaving enduring echoes that challenge contemporary assumptions. Ultimately, the Sphinx functions as both mirror and archive. It reflects the ambitions, authority, and limitations of those who interacted with it, while preserving evidence of epochs far removed from human record. Its eroded, body-hidden voids, misaligned restorations, and celestial alignment all testify to knowledge and artistry that eludes modern explanation. In these convergences, the Sphinx challenges the notion that history is linear, that progress is steady, or that human understanding is complete. It embodies the persistence of matter, memory, and mystery, a nexus where geology, astronomy, and culture intersect in silence, urging reflection on what endures, what is lost, and what remains unknowable. Some mysteries wait, others watch. The more we examine the Sphinx, the more it resists simple categorization. Each layer of stone, each groove, and each recarved feature speaks to a timeline that is fragmented, layered, and deeply entangled with both natural and human processes. The weathering patterns on the body indicate exposure to climates radically different from the present, with rainfall sufficient to carve the limestone over thousands of years. This evidence contradicts the conventional attribution to Khafra and the 4th dynasty, suggesting instead a monument far older carved when the Sahara was verdant and rivers traced their courses through landscapes now lost to desertification. In this light, the Sphinx emerges not as a creation of a single civilization, but as a survivor of epochs whose names have been forgotten. Beneath the Sphinx, the hidden voids recorded by seismic and electromagnetic surveys amplify the sense of unresolved history. Rectangular anomalies suggest deliberate construction, forming chambers or passageways whose purposes remain speculative. Permission to explore these spaces has repeatedly been denied, ostensibly for preservation. Yet the result is decades of unanswered questions. These inaccessible chambers invite speculation about archives, ritual spaces, or remnants of civilizations that predated Egypt itself. Each layer of stone and void suggests that human comprehension is partial, constrained by bureaucratic limitations, cultural narratives, and the inherent difficulty of interpreting traces from deep time. The recarved head, disproportionately relative to the body, reveals ideological transformation layered upon older forms. The original leonine head, if it existed, may have been reshaped into a pharaonic visage, recasting the monument's meaning to align with dynastic authority. The ceremonial beard, stylistically inconsistent with the 4th dynasty, further underscores how successive generations appropriated the Sphinx to serve political and religious purposes. What began as an enigmatic artifact of unknown origin became a tool for asserting legitimacy, a canvas upon which rulers projected power, identity, and cosmic order. The Sphinx thus becomes both a witness and an instrument of historical narrative simultaneously shaped by and shaping human intention. Astronomical alignments deepen the mystery. The Sphinx's eastward gaze corresponds to the heliacal rising of Leo around 10,500 BC, while the pyramids reflect the position of Orion's belt at the same epoch. Such precise celestial orientation implies a sophisticated understanding of astronomical cycles and the precession of the equinoxes. The monument encodes a temporal marker that transcends human lifespans, suggesting knowledge of the heavens that may have informed the placement and design of surrounding structures. These alignments indicate that the creators, whether dynastic Egyptians or a preceding culture, possessed the ability to observe and translate cosmic phenomena into enduring architectural form. Geology and astronomy converge to challenge linear models of human history. The erosion caused by sustained rainfall demonstrates that the Sphinx endured climates radically different from today, recording an environmental history that predates dynastic settlement. The celestial alignments suggest deliberate knowledge transfer across centuries, possibly millennia, embedding cultural memory into stone. This dual record, geological and astronomical, contradicts the idea of a monument constructed solely within a well-documented Bronze Age framework. It hints at a civilization capable of engineering observation and preservation beyond the conventional narrative of human development. The Sphinx's existence, in conjunction with these hidden voids and celestial alignments, invites reflection on the resilience and fragility of knowledge. Techniques used to carve and recarve its body suggest sophisticated craftsmanship partially lost over time. Successive interventions preserved the monument yet also obscured its origins. Stone once cut cannot be restored. Knowledge once lost is often irretrievable. The Sphinx embodies both permanence and vulnerability, offering glimpses into civilizations that mastered forces of stone sky and time while reminding us that mastery can be ephemeral and obscured by the passage of millennia. This complexity reframes conventional assumptions about linear progression in human history. The abrupt emergence of technical skill, architectural precision, and astronomical alignment suggests that civilization may arise, flourish, and vanish in cycles, leaving fragments whose significance can be partially recovered but never fully known. The Sphinx thus serves as both evidence and enigma, a measure of what was possible and a reminder of what is lost. Its enduring presence invites a meditation on temporal scale, human ambition, and the interplay between nature and culture. The layering of history, the stratification of human intervention, and the record of environmental change converge in the Sphinx to challenge our conception of continuity. Each generation that encountered the monument reshaped it, recarving, adding, or modifying as needed. These acts were not neutral. They imposed interpretation upon a pre-existing artifact, blending reverence with authority. In doing so, successive civilizations converted mystery into meaning, embedding ideology and cosmology into stone, yet leaving the original knowledge incomplete, hidden, or erased. The Sphinx becomes a nexus where geology, astronomy, and cultural memory intersect, demanding interpretation across disciplines. The Sphinx's survival is a testament to endurance across catastrophic events. Climate shifts, floods, societal collapse, and human intervention have all imprinted themselves upon the limestone, yet the monument remains. Its persistence challenges assumptions about the fragility of human achievement and the permanence of environmental forces. As a witness to epochs that predate recorded history, it offers insights into the capacity of structures to outlast civilizations, to convey knowledge encoded not in language, but in orientation, scale, and materiality. Ultimately, the Sphinx exemplifies the tension between observation and understanding. Its recarved visage, weathered body, and hidden chambers compel reflection on the limits of empirical study. It demonstrates that monuments are both repositories and intermediaries, preserving traces of skill, intention, and environmental history, while resisting complete comprehension. The interplay of natural forces, human intervention, and celestial encoding suggests that understanding must be provisional, layered with humility, an awareness of what is lost to time. In observing the Sphinx, one encounters the persistence of complexity, the endurance of uncertainty, and the intersection of natural and human histories. Its grooves, voids, recarvings, and alignments testify to knowledge both preserved and obscured. It is a sentinel of deep time, a record of what endures when civilizations fade, and a reminder that our assumptions about the past are always provisional. The Sphinx challenges us to consider not only what was created, but also what survives what has been transformed, and what remains unknowable, suspended in the silence of stone. Tonight the universe whispers again. As the centuries accumulated, the Sphinx became more than a monument. It transformed into a palimpsest of ambition, memory, and ideology. Each recarving of its head, each restoration of fractured stone, was an attempt to reconcile the unknown with the needs of the living. Labourers, priests, and rulers across generations left their marks not merely to preserve, but to assert meaning, to claim authority over a legacy they partially understood. Misaligned blocks, uneven repairs, and stylistic inconsistencies testify to the tension between inherited knowledge and human limitation. The monument embodies the paradox of permanence it endures, yet the truths it was meant to convey remain obscured. Beneath the surface, hidden voids amplify the enigma. Rectangular chambers detected with seismic and electromagnetic methods suggest deliberate construction, yet remain inaccessible. Permissions to investigate have been denied repeatedly, leaving questions suspended between evidence and speculation. The presence of these spaces implies a complexity unseen from above, a possibility of archives, ritual rooms, or remnants of a civilization predating dynastic Egypt. Each denied excavation is a reminder that knowledge is constrained not only by what exists, but by the choices of those who guard it, and that authority can shape what is observed as much as what is discovered. Astronomical alignment strengthens the Sphinx's narrative. Its eastward gaze coincides with the rising of Leo during the spring equinox, a correspondence dating back to 10,500 BC. Nearby pyramids mirror Orion's belt in the same ancient epoch. These celestial calibrations suggest advanced observation, encoding temporal and spatial information into stone. The intersection of earth and sky implies not randomness but intention, a cultural memory preserved across millennia. The Sphinx in this framework becomes both a time capsule and an instruction, a record of human knowledge reaching toward cosmic understanding far beyond what the historical record attributes to early dynastic Egypt. Erosion patterns reinforce this interpretation. Grooves carved by persistent rainfall, smoothed over millennia, indicate a climate radically different from the present desert. The African humid period left traces in limestone that survived long after the rivers and lakes vanished. The Sphinx's body in this sense is a geological chronicle. It carries the memory of an ecosystem, a climate and a society now vanished. It suggests the existence of a civilization capable of monumental construction in a landscape no longer hospitable, challenging the notion that complex society emerged gradually from arid, marginal settlements. The layering of human intervention adds ideological texture to the monument. Recarving, ceremonial additions, and stylistic inconsistencies mark a dialogue between rulers and the past. Each generation reshaped the Sphinx to reflect authority, legitimacy, and religious order, transforming mystery into political instrument. The disparity between the original craftsmanship and later restorations implies a loss of technical knowledge over centuries, a civilization engaging with a relic it could not fully reproduce or comprehend. The Sphinx therefore exists as both artifact and record, preserving evidence of skills, intentions, and cosmological awareness. The convergence of climate, astronomy, and human activity reveals a broader pattern. Civilizations may rise, master profound knowledge, and vanish, leaving fragments whose significance is partially recovered by those who follow. The Sphinx embodies this continuity and lost its alignment with celestial patterns, its geological record, and the human marks layered upon it, all point to a civilization whose achievements exceeded those of dynastic Egypt, or whose knowledge was inherited and adapted by later cultures. These intersections suggest that linear narratives of progress may obscure cycles of collapse and transmission. In this context, The Sphinx functions as both mirror and archive. It reflects the ambitions and limitations of those who touched it, while preserving traces of pre-dynastic skill and understanding. Its weathered body and misaligned restorations remind us that human comprehension is incomplete. Knowledge encoded in stone passed through generations and altered by interpretation resists definitive explanation. The Sphinx embodies a tension between permanence and incomprehensibility, the endurance of material, the fragility of understanding, and the persistence of questions across millennia. Ultimately, the Sphinx challenges assumptions about human development and the linearity of history. It demonstrates that advanced architectural, astronomical, and geological knowledge can precede the written record, leaving evidence that only careful observation and reflection can reveal. The monument is at once tangible and elusive, offering insight while withholding certainty. Its hidden chambers, weathered stone, and celestial orientation collectively suggest that civilizations of profound sophistication may have existed, leaving legacies that survive in fragmentary, enigmatic form. In contemplating the Sphinx, one observes a dialogue between human ambition and environmental forces, between cosmic alignment and terrestrial endurance. The monument is a threshold where archaeology, astronomy, and geology converge, inviting reconsideration of conventional timelines and historical certainty. Its persistence, both physical and symbolic, underscores the delicate interplay between what is created, what survives, and what is understood. The Sphinx stands as testament to endurance, mystery, and the echoes of civilizations whose voices have been muted by time. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. If the Sphinx endures as a riddle, it is partly because it sits at the junction of disciplines that rarely agree on timelines. Archaeology asks who built it and when. Geology reads the surface as a long-term record of climate and exposure. Astronomy treats orientation and pattern as intentional signals. Each field carries its own methods, its own uncertainties, and its own temptations towards certainty. The Sphinx survives in the gap between them, where evidence is real, but interpretation remains contested. That gap is not a weakness of inquiry. It is the normal state of serious historical science, when the subject is older than writing, older than continuous documentation, older than the habits of record-keeping that let modern history feel stable. A carved monument can persist through millennia while the social world that produced it dissolves, leaving only fragments of context. Later cultures arrive, restore what they can, reshape what they need, and attach new meanings to inherited stone. In that process, the object becomes layered, not a single act of construction, but an accumulation of revisions. The most provocative claims about the Sphinx: extreme antiquity, climatic mismatch. Deliberate celestial encoding, concealed chambers share one defining feature. They are testable in principle, but difficult to settle in practice. Erosion can be compared across structures and strata, but limestone behaves unevenly, and microenvironments complicate clean conclusions. Alignments can be calculated precisely, but human pattern seeking can mistake coincidence for design. Subsurface anomalies can be detected, but access and permission determine whether anomalies become knowledge or remain rumors wearing the mask of data. This is why the Sphinx has become more than an Egyptian icon. It has turned into a case study in how narratives harden. Institutions' careers, national identity, tourism economies, and academic orthodoxies can all pull in the same direction, encouraging closure even when questions remain open. Yet skepticism cuts both ways. A comfortable timeline should not be protected from inconvenient observations, but an exciting alternative should not be sheltered from scrutiny either. The standard should be consistent methods first, interpretations second, certainty only where it is earned. What the Sphinx ultimately forces into view is the fragility of historical memory. Human societies can lose techniques, forget origins, misattribute monuments, and overwrite inconvenient pasts. Civilizations can inherit artifacts they did not create, and then speak of them as if they always belonged. When that happens, stone becomes a battleground between what is true, what is useful, and what is believed. The Sphinx, with its disproportions, repairs, and contested surfaces, seems almost built to demonstrate this pattern. Perhaps the most responsible conclusion is also the most unsettling. The Sphinx may be older than the story most people tell about it, and even if it is not, the uncertainties around it reveal how easily confidence can outpace evidence. In either case, the monument stands as a reminder that deep history is not a straight line. It is a landscape of gaps, echoes, and partial recoveries, where humility is not an aesthetic choice, but a scientific requirement. The Sphinx remains where it has always been, facing the same horizon, receiving the same sunrise, collecting the same slow weathering of centuries. The questions do not diminish it, they enlarge it. We've reached the edge of tonight's story, traveller, where the sand grows quiet again, and the last echoes of our footsteps fade back into the stone. For a little while we stood beside a monument that refuses to behave like a simple answer. We trace the seams of repair, the proportions that don't quite agree, the kind of silence that can linger longer than any inscription. And somewhere between geology and myth, between measurement and memory, the Sphinx remained what it has always been, a question that outlives the people who try to claim it. There's a strange comfort in that. In the vast arithmetic of time, our certainty is small, and it doesn't need to be anything else. The past is not a closed room. It is a corridor, with doors we haven't learned to open yet. And even when we can't step inside, the listening still matters, because silence is not emptiness. Sometimes it is the universe thinking, slowly, patiently, in layers. So let the mystery stay unfinished. Let it rest where it belongs, beneath starlight and wind, where dust becomes chronology, and erosion becomes a kind of long, careful handwriting. Rest now, observer. Stay curious if you can. And if this story found you tonight, you may drift with me into the next one. Sleep, traveller. The universe will keep watch.